super relaxed, super casual. Welcome back to another edition of Proyecto Podcast, the official podcast of the Latin Builders Association, and as I always like to say, the companion to Proyecto magazine. We try to really highlight our member companies and kind of get to know some of our members. Today we have a good friend, Rafael Aquino, the founder, president, CEO, and emperor of Affinity Management Services, a property management, full service property management firm. And Rafael's a special guy because he used to be with the LBA before, didn't get anything out of it. Somehow I talked him into giving it a chance, and now he's all in. So I appreciate you joining us today. I appreciate you being part of the LBA. I think you have a great company and really kind of want to get to know more about the property. There's a lot going on in property management, particularly coming out of Ian and coming out of the Surfside issue. So I think that there's a lot that we can talk about. I do want to kind of touch a little bit on your LBA experience. I think we've tried to, whenever we've done these podcasts, we want to talk a little bit about your experiences. Walk me through your first entry into the LBA and now, and hopefully what you're getting out of it now. It seems like you're more engaged, more excited, which I'm very thankful for and happy for you.
Sure. So first and foremost, Gus, I wanted to thank you for having me on. I greatly appreciate it. When it comes to the LBA itself, initially it was years ago that I decided to join, and when I first initially joined, it just felt a little bit uncomfortable. I felt a little bit out of place. It could have been many things, maybe myself not understanding that it was going to take some time to build the connections. But ultimately with time, I started to see several partners that I work with or vendors. They spoke very highly of the organization. You and I met at one of the networking events. You definitely did a good sales job, and told me that you were going to be there to guide me throughout the process and introduce me to where I needed to be introduced. And honestly, it's been nice. It's been feels much more welcoming to me. But like anything else in life, it's the commitment that you put to the organization or where you're going to network. And I've noticed that the more I've put into the LBA, the more I've gotten back when it comes to relationships, individuals wanting to work with you or help you out. So I've been appreciative of everyone making it feel very welcoming this time around. And honestly, I understand that I got to put that commitment in as well. That's great, and you have, and I'm thankful for that commitment as well. I want to, kind of looking at your background and having conversations with you in the past. You're an FIU grad, fellow FIU grad. Go Panthers. Yeah, that's right. An engineering graduate, which isn't a traditional natural role into property management. How did that path come to be? Yeah, so I always get asked that question. How the heck did you go from engineering into, community association management, property management? So I actually always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My mom graduated college, my dad didn't. So it was always put into me once they saw that I was good in math and science that, you need to be an engineer. So we came from very humble beginnings. I was initially going to be a civil engineer just because I've always loved structures and buildings and so forth. I decided to do electrical and graduated at FIU. And my dream was to work for FPL. That was where I wanted to work. And I got an opportunity, but unfortunately I was beat out on the final interview. Oh, wow. So in a way, it's a blessing in disguise. You should thank that person that beat you out. That's correct. So, one way or another, I was going to get in. So I started working customer service. But at that same time, I had a friend that I went to high school with, just never graduated. And he said, look, I'm in the real estate. I'm interested in doing this. And had just finished reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to make the jump, I'm going to make the jump now. So we got into land development, believe it or not, in Allapattah, before Allapattah was Allapattah and before Wynwood was Wynwood. And we were pretty successful. We had about a 5-year run. We basically just knocked on doors, convincing individuals to sell. We came from very humble beginnings, so we weren't able to close on the deals. So we put them under contract and we would assign them to developers. So it went well for us. We saved a lot of money, still living at home. We said, okay, eventually we're going to develop, and we'll start developing some small condos. During that same time, I had family members in the community management space. And we said, well, the market seems like it's softening. We should start a management company. We build, and then we'll manage as well. Okay. So we closed our first couple of deals in early 2007. We finally closed 2 pretty big lots for us. We had pretty decent holding power, but they were just vacant lots. Okay. Unfortunately, 2008 comes around. We started the management company in '07. We held as long as we can, but unfortunately, we had no choice, and we lost everything at that time. So luckily for us, we had started the management company, and now fast forward 16 years, we have 70 associations, 15,000 doors. So it was difficult at that time to go through that. But ultimately, it taught me a lot of lessons, and it's allowed me to really grow as an individual. And I am here today because, of those, some would say mistakes, some would say errors, but honestly, to me, they were lessons.
That's great that's a great story. That's great to hear, that resiliency. And I know that's a central theme for you. And you mentioned 70 properties. Are they all in South Florida?
Yes. Right now we're located in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. We're just
all the way to Palm Beach. Great.
Yeah, and we're just expanding. We just got our first property in Collier County in Naples.
Okay.
So we're very excited to expand into that area.
Have you looked into the Monroe County area? And only because I asked that because some of the new legislation, and we'll get into that a little bit, but some of that stuff, particularly for the property management aspect, in Monroe County, it's having its effect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are looking into Monroe. We've been trying to penetrate that market for a while. There isn't that much market share for us when it comes to on-site properties, but at the moment we are bidding on a nice property in that area, so we are looking to expand there.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that you have a background in land development and real estate development. And you and I have had this conversation a few times, that you really, one of the things that you do is work with developers early on, even before the units are up, to kind of create a plan. And I wonder if you could walk through that. We have developers of different sizes in our association, so I wonder if you can kind of walk us through that process.
Sure. So we've helped a lot of more of the medium size, even though we work with one or two larger ones. But the process really for us, what we help a lot with is putting together the initial budget for the developers, giving them an idea of what we see, of what works, what doesn't work. Because ultimately they're trying to leave a legacy and they're trying to leave a beautiful product for whoever's going to purchase it. So our role during that initial development stage is to just give them some insight, mainly on budgets, mainly on, look, this is what we've seen that's worked. For the HOAs, you find, especially down in Homestead where there's been a huge growth, you'll find like different fences, paint colors. So we're trying to give them the guidance so that when people move in, they understand what they're moving into. These are the rules and regulations, and depending on the product as well. So more, we deal with more of the middle product, and we want to give them those guidance so that when residents come in, they're not the ones beating up, the developer. Why is this way? Why is that way? We're giving them really good guidance on what they should be putting into the rules and regulations and into those budgets.
Interesting. And how much of your business or in the industry goes from associations or property management associations that are self-managed, and how they transition into hiring an off-source vendor or company like yours? Because part of what we're seeing now, the reserves and the management of, and frankly, the labor market, right? It's difficult sometimes for an association to maintain the level of service that they've committed to the residents, and they find it easier to bring in a professional entity that can kind of handle that.
Yeah, that's correct. And you'd be amazed that the self-managed portion, we've seen it grow over the past 2 to 3 years.
Oh, really? See, I thought it would go the other way.
Yeah, no, it's grown because of two things. You nailed it on the head when it comes to the staffing, because when you're self-managed, the board of directors are the ones that are pretty much handling everything. They're handling, the recruiting, they're handling onboarding, having to deal with all those different components. But after the recent legislation and all the changes that are coming when it comes to reserves, and I'm sure we'll touch on that, a lot of board members have realized that this is going to be a lot of work for us to deal with. So they've decided to go the route of self-managed. Now, Florida being, a place where a lot of individuals move down, at least over the past years, now things are changing a little bit. You'll find a lot of retired individuals. So believe it or not, at one point, I believe the stat was about 50% of associations were self-managed. But now that's gradually changing because they're realizing the value that a management company could bring to the table when it comes to staffing, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to technology as well. Because as a self-managed property, you really don't know, you're not in tune with what's going on with the world of association management. So that's where we can play an integral role.
No, and what's interesting is I have some friends that are going through something now with a property that they live in, where self-managed and the actual, I guess the team or the board of directors for that matter, chose to essentially redirect the dollars they receive for a specific claim to another part of the association. So now when it comes time to reinsure it, now the insurance company is saying, well, that roof wasn't fixed. So what can we do?
No, those are the challenges that you find a lot of times when you're not working with a professional organization. Ultimately, the way we see it is, as a management company, we basically facilitate. You know, many times board members believe we do everything, and the reality is our role is to have the networks, have the partnerships, to be able to relay information to partners, whether it be attorney, or in certain instances such as that, is just give them the guidance. Like, look, this is not the way you're supposed to handle it. If you don't believe this is the way it needs to be done, then let's contact the attorney, have them give us a legal opinion. What's that going to cost the association, an hour or two? And really give them that guidance to understand what should and what shouldn't be done.
Now, you mentioned legislation, and I know there's been, after Hurricane Ian, there was some legislation. After the what took place in Surfside, the tragedy in Surfside, really that was a catalyst for a relook at the way properties are inspected, what type of properties can be inspected, should be inspected, what the timeline is. Can you touch a little bit, because I think, you know, you kind of, from a layman's perspective, you read the top line that's on the article, but getting into the weeds, you know, my eyes glaze over when I get into that. That's your world.
Yeah, so it's pretty dense. Ultimately, especially after Surfside, there's a lot of changes coming. You're starting to now see the news is starting to report on it. And basically, from a 30,000-foot perspective, any condo that's 3 stories or higher is going to be impacted. In Miami-Dade and Broward, there are some changes because right now they're still working out. They have their own slight changes. But ultimately, what they've done is they're requiring associations to have reserves. And those reserves are specific to what they need is a structural integrity reserve that needs to be done. There's about 10 components within that structural integrity. But when you look at it, it's pretty much the main components that associations should be reserving for. On top of that, they're also requiring a phase 1 or a phase 2 inspection that needs to be done by an engineer. So the challenges that are having are more associations that never had a reserves or had very limited reserves. So I can give you an example. We have a building right now that has decided to vote down reserves for years, even though against our recommendations. But ultimately the board had that right to do so. Now they're finding themselves in a position where they need to either get a loan for $3 to $5 million or pass a special assessment. So that's a significant amount of money for a building that, in this case, about 20% have fixed incomes. So it's going to be a very tough time. But ultimately, if it's never occurred, they wouldn't be in this situation. This is occurring with many associations that unfortunately decided to waive the reserves and not put away what they should have put away.
Yeah, and it's a difficult, to your point, particularly those folks on fixed income. For those of us that have some rental properties, the word special assessment is it's a difficult one to hear because you know a big bill is coming. But you know it's a reality, right? It's a reality, and then you're seeing, you know, it almost seems like it's been, pardon the pun, but almost a perfect storm. Not only with the tragedy in Surfside, what happened in Hurricane Ian, but down here in Miami-Dade, a conversation we've also had. The situation that happened out in the hammocks, and for me, you're the expert in that space. Would love for you to kind of give us your take on it, because I think it's so difficult to understand. I really kind of want to get your take on it.
Sure. So without knowing all the details of exactly what occurred within hammocks, we all know that it was major. You know, there was some major fraud, is what we've heard, over $2 million. And a lot of times why that occurs, it's really there's not proper accounting protocols, there's not systems, there's not checks and balances to be able to make sure that whatever's occurring within the association is in line with what, you know, GAAP, the general accounting principles that associations should guide themselves from. So in, let's say, the case of hammocks, if you had, let's say, a professional organization in there, they're going to have certain protocols where they're going to have the financials are not only done by the management company, but they're also checked with different team members within the management company. So that way they're turned in properly. There's going to be technology in place where the board has full access to, you know, when invoices were approved, what were the amounts that were approved, are they having 2 board members approve those invoices. So there's certain accounting protocols that are being followed to make sure or try to avoid that from happening. We all know that there's ways of getting around things, but at least if you have the basic protocols, then you can avoid these kinds of issues, because no management company is going to put their license on the line for a couple thousand or even $100,000. It just makes no sense, no business sense.
And I think the challenge in the hammocks, just kind of from my perspective, is it's a lower middle income, middle class community. Folks work very hard. And sometimes when they send them these, sometimes extensive financial data on the association, even if you send it to them electronically, follow up with a hard copy, it doesn't really get looked at a lot.
You're completely true, Gus, and unfortunately that's what does occur. Ultimately, they are pretty simple in general. I mean, I know most individuals don't know how to read them, but what I tell members of the association is try to get involved, at least try to understand what's going on. You can do that you don't have to attend every meeting, but just looking at the minutes, take a peek at the financials, just look at what the balance sheet is one month to the other month, and just see why is there such a big differential.
Why is it changing so much?
Why is it changing so much? And ultimately, again, if you're working with a good organization, they're going to train you and give you some good understanding of how to read them. But ultimately, as a member of the association, you have a responsibility as well to be requesting them. And if you're not receiving them, then that's an automatic red flag. But you have that responsibility, and I always suggest that you should be taking a peek at them.
Now, I know that you mentioned 70 communities, 15,000 homes from doors. Do you get, I always think there's a market for this, but the property owner that has a handful of properties, and they're not congruent to each other. It's one here, one in Northwest Dade, one in Southwest Dade, one in Kendall, one in City of Miami. Asking for a friend. What kind of how does that get? Can that be service also? I'm assuming at your size, it's not worth it. But how can a single property or someone that owns a handful of properties, how can they get a management service that can handle the tenant recruitment and background checks, the maintenance aspect of it, and just making sure that from an insurance, from a coverage perspective, you're on top of things?
Yeah, so for us, our sweet spot is really community association management, so we don't get in that world of single management. There are organizations that do it. However, for us, as we've grown and as we've matured in our business cycle, we've realized that our space is on-site properties that have an on-site team, that have a team that manage the association. To answer your question, there are organizations that do that. For a percentage is what I've been told. But there are organizations that do a good job for it, and more organizations have popped up, especially now with the Airbnb market that's going on.
That's right. I didn't think of that. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
But as owners, what I try to tell them is understand that, it's a low margin. They say on average, I think it's about 10% what they charge. So just don't get oversold, because people promise the world and then they can't deliver on it. But ultimately, I do know that there are organizations that service that sector.
I want to get a little bit on legislation, because I know you follow that closely, and I watch your snippets in social media where you give pretty detailed analysis. It's been great. It's been very a good education for me. The federal housing rules, county housing rules seem to be let's say changing or adjusting, maybe is a better word. Walk us through that maze, because it's kind of a maze the way things have shifted a bit.
Yeah, so for us, what we follow more has to do more with the Florida legislation, 718, 719, 720. But those still ever shifting. I mean, every year right now they're going through legislation. Right now they're going through the entire process of determining what's going to be changed, what's not going to be changed. One of the big things that right now is being discussed is what's going to happen with the Surfside bill. Are there going to be any changes? Are they going to extend the time frame that reserves are going to be needed? Because as of now, the requirement is January 1st, 2025. They need to be fully funded one way or another. So what we try to do as an organization is try to do videos, try to do webinars, really trying to keep board members up to speed of what's going on. We do it with industry professionals, so it's not just us giving the tips. We're working with experts such as attorneys, legislators, just getting them on so that we're giving this information to board members. At Affinity, we try to do it very simple with 2-minute videos, because we understand board members are volunteers. They don't get paid for what they do. So we try to keep it very simple for them. But again, we try to stay on top of it because it's our responsibility as an organization. And since we're dealing with nonprofits, we find it's our responsibility to break the information down, chew it up for them, and just give it to them as easily as possible so that they can digest it and apply it in their communities, whether they work with us or they don't work with us.
You mentioned the Surfside legislation, Surfside bill. One of the things that, and we've talked about this, between privately, we have the Builders Expo coming up, and one of the signature panels discussions, which I'm hoping you can help me with, is lessons from Surfside. Without giving away too much, because we like to save some for the expo, but what were the lessons from Surfside? How do we think that, I know that you mentioned is ever-changing, but what were the lessons? What is the right approach? And is the legislature taking the right approach to that legislation adjustment?
Sure. So yeah, I mean that's a lot there to unpack. I'll try to keep it as simple, but hopefully they attend the expo so they can get all the information because we're going to have some great experts on that. But ultimately, some of the lessons that were learned there is, from a board member perspective, I would say is not kicking that can down the road. As the way I see it, if you're a board member, you're a leader for that association. And as a leader, you have to understand that you have to make very difficult decisions. And sometimes as a board member, it's difficult to do that just because these are residents that live with you, they're your neighbors. I don't want to pass a special assessment. Now is now the time or not? But the way things have been going, especially in construction, costs just keep going up. It's just the nature of everything. It's what we live in, no matter where you are, in what industry. In that case, they kept pushing it down, and the cost just kept escalating, and it became something bigger than what it necessarily needed to be. Also making that tough decision, even though legislation is fixing this, of putting away money for reserves. Many times people fall into the trap of, well, I'm not going to be here in 6 years. I'm retired. I'm a snowbird, and I'll be gone in 2 years. I'll be in the ground. Right. But ultimately, you use that for 6 years. So it wouldn't be fair, even if you're giving that as an inheritance to someone, to your family member, whatever it may be, for them to have to take on that full responsibility. So what are our legislators doing? I do believe that they acted quickly. Right now, I believe there's going to be pushback just because of the impact that it's going to have to their constituents. So there's going to be big decisions that they're going to have to make. But ultimately, they passed the bill. I believe that they did the best that they could with what they were given. Now is what they'll spend the next 2 years either cleaning it up or figuring it out, how it's going to impact and how are they going to manage through it. I know in Miami-Dade there's been some grants that are being provided for certain individuals to help with the special assessments. But ultimately, I do believe that this is the right decision of requiring associations to have reserves, because as a board member, you're a volunteer. And if the funds are there, then you're not going to kick that can down the road. If you're a little bit short, which in this case legislation passed where every 10 years they need to recertify that structural integrity reserve. So they'll be in a much better position where they'll be able to do these repairs. You don't have that decision that sometimes associations in the past used to do, which is, let me fix the lobby, the residents will be happy, but no one's looking at those cracks on the roof, no one's looking at the AC that's broken. And in this case, now you'll have money for the lobby, you'll have money for the AC or for the structural components. So I think they're doing the best that they can do. It's difficult to give them all the information that we get from the ground floor. But we're doing our part as an industry through either COMC of trying to provide them, or CAI, give them as much information as possible so that they could do the best job that they can for our citizens.
And even beyond that, I think some of those legislative initiatives are also having an effect on construction, right? Yeah. On construction costs and construction approach. Certainly contractors are being considerably more diligent in their work. Architects are being, paying granular in detail because of some of those, particularly areas that are, coastal areas. So.
And that's a great point. And as there's pros and cons to the legislation. One of the cons is that, and which you can't control, is that now there's going to be so many buildings that are going to be under repair. So great for the construction industry, great for the state in itself. For the economy, I should say, but ultimately the costs are not going to go down. These repairs are going to be necessary. No one, there's still some stats in our world of whether we have enough construction companies, whether we have enough engineers to be able to meet the demand. There's some back and forth whether there is or there isn't. I personally believe that there isn't because of the amount of associations that exist. But ultimately, you know, if the reserves were in place when they needed to be, then these buildings would have been maintained and there would have been a good cadence of the repairs being done. But I think we're moving in a good direction. I think it's great for our state. I think it's great for the residents because, again, if they have the money and things are being done and they understand what the true cost is to live in an association. Right. Many times they've had these how do I call it, these fake maintenance fees that they thought, oh, well, this is my fee. It's been the same for 20 years, and they pat themselves in the back. And the reality is that they've been doing more an injustice to those residents than anything else.
Yeah. No, and I think people are paying a lot more attention to those documents. I certainly have been reading mine when they send them a lot more.
Oh, my friends don't stop calling me. Hey, what's going on with
what
this? What I do here? Yeah,
what's its term?
Correct.
Let me ask you, I know that you still have some interest in real estate.
Yes.
And again, not to give away too much of the expo, but one of the continuous conversations we're having as an association, as a board, is how does Miami look in 25 years, in 50 years? More people are moving into South Florida. We're getting them from the Northeast. We're getting them from the West Coast. Mm-hmm. We're also getting them from South America. Anytime there's somewhat of a political chaotic environment in South America, a lot of those folks come to Miami and kind of stay in Miami. Yeah. You are, like you mentioned, you're involved in West Palm Beach, in Broward. You have company associations that you manage in West Palm Beach and Broward and Miami-Dade County. So you have a pretty wide lens of which way the real estate market is going. I'm curious about your take and what you're seeing for the future of South Florida.
Sure. So I think the future is very promising overall. Ultimately, what we're seeing is there's a little bit of an imbalance when it comes to the affordability side. I mean, the big developers like the NAR and so forth, they're doing their part to be able to feed a big market that's in need. And we need that here in South Florida because ultimately we need your regular day-to-day workers in order to get the economy going. But I think we're in a great market. Ultimately, you're seeing big growth in Palm Beach, especially because there was significant land. You're seeing down in Homestead, I mean, a change in Homestead has been astronomical. I mean, we've grown significantly just in that market from the HOA side. Broward, not as much for us, but Naples area, we're starting to see there's growth there. But overall, I think it's not going to slow down. I think ultimately we're in a great state. You know, what COVID did opened up many individuals' eyes of, you know, how things are led here in the state of Florida in a very positive way, at least from my opinion. So people are coming this way, especially with the tax benefits that we have here. But as a state, and I can speak for as South Florida, we don't see the growth stopping in any way. And that's from both the HOA side as well as from the condo side as well.
I agree, and I think if you look at some of the workforce housing legislation that's been discussed at the state level, really trying, which is an argument, not an argument, but a conversation we've had as an association with the legislature. The state of Florida, the legislative arm of the state of Florida, seemed to look at the state of Florida monolithically, not differentiating South Florida from perhaps some of the rural areas. It seems that now, and I give a lot of credit to our Dade delegation because they really pushed that forward. Now you're creating some incentives for workforce housing. I think that's going to, you know, provide some relief. I do want to talk a little bit about, you know, Hurricane Ian, what that did to the west coast of Florida. To me, that was an area that was very nostalgic. Fort Myers Beach is one of my favorite places, but we'll never see that old Florida world again. I don't think. How do you see that transforming? What effect will that have on the rest of the state, on those old towns?
I think that there's going to be an impact. I think no different than what we went through here in South Florida with Andrew.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm pretty certain that the building codes are going to change for that area. Yeah. I think they're going to become much more stringent, much stricter. You know, it's unfortunate what occurred there, especially because a lot of the damage that occurred is going to be categorized, or I should say is categorized under more of a flood damage. Okay. And unfortunately, at least from the association side and from the partners that we deal with, you know, some buildings just didn't have flood coverage. So they're going to find themselves in a very difficult situation. Wow. But like anything else, you know, as humans, we're very resilient. So I think, you know, we're just going to find a different way of how we're going to approach it. And I think associations and the residents of that area will prosper. It's just going to take some time. It's very difficult, the road to recovery. But ultimately, I believe it will be no different than when Andrew hit here in South Florida. And the Floridians, South Floridians stood up and did what they needed to do. We corrected building codes. We made things much stricter. The challenge that I see, Gus, is just on the insurance side. There was a recent special session to try to assist. There's some back and forth of whether we'll see the benefits or not. I personally don't believe we'll see the benefits. But ultimately, that's one of the biggest factors of cost here in South Florida right now is just insurance. It's out the roof, if you can even get insured for certain associations. So it's a very challenging moment for our industry because we're dealing with the 1-2 punch of having to deal with insurance and having to deal with the new legislation. So our jobs have become much more difficult. But again, we enjoy those moments where we could show the values to show the value to our kind of what we can bring. In certain instances, we can control it. In certain instances, we can't. So
that's going to be a part 2 of the podcast. Yeah. That's going to be a future podcast, getting into that.
I have some experts we could bring in on that.
You have some homework. We both have some homework to do. To end on a light note, we talked a little bit before we started talking on air about fishing and things of that nature. What do you do for fun? What do you like to do?
Sure. So I definitely do enjoy fishing. I have really right now what I enjoy the most are my 2 little ones, my 5 and my 4-year-old. I have an amazing wife. So, but I do enjoy fishing. I'm getting to the running and cycling. I used to do a lot of triathlons, but I have a 5 and a 4-year-old, and those keep me pretty busy.
That's pretty. That's pretty dope. And I know you signed up already for our fishing tournament.
Looking forward to it.
You gotta find a way. I know that you and your global pro buddies will go out there. If I know Dan, he's gonna try to get a bigger boat and get a lot more. He didn't like coming in like 3rd or 4th last year, so we look forward to having you.
Thank you.
Rafael, super great to have you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Always enjoy talking to you. If you can kind of tell the camera, I just want to, where they can reach you. We have real estate folks, developers on the membership if they need your help. Would love to be able to connect you that way. So
great. Well, first and foremost, Gus, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to have a great conversation with you. For those that want to reach us, you can reach us at our website, managedbyaffinity.com, or you can call us at our local number, 305-325-4243. Looking forward to hearing from you. Any questions? I know associations, there's a lot going on, but just feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best to try to provide you some guidance, or if not, point you in the right direction with a partner or that would be able to give you the information that's necessary.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you, Gus, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.